they get to that retirement age, they get sick, a spouse gets sick. Like it's not, it's a very small percentage of people that get there and then truly get to enjoy it to the max of its potential because of health. Welcome to the Rejecting Average podcast, where we challenge the status quo and push back against modern complacency. Join Chris and Brett Betcher as we talk health, leading our families, and living intentionally, because average just isn't good enough. Most men spend more time planning their retirement portfolio than they do protecting their body, and that's the asset that really makes it all possible. And tonight, Brett and I are going to dig into why that's so important and what you can do about it to set yourself up for success for the decades to come. So, Brett, well, I'm going to throw it over to you here right away, man. What if I told you there was an investment that returned $250K in lifetime earnings, saved you $300,000 in retirement healthcare costs, and made every other area of your life better? Is that something you'd take?
Yeah, I think we all would. And yeah, what you're getting at is the idea that, over the course of a lifetime, a person actually makes $250,000 more when they are healthy compared to their unhealthy counterpart. And it sounds exaggerated, but I mean, if you think about it, like even a single promotion at, 35 or 40 versus your counterparts is really going to put you significantly ahead. And if you look around, it's like who ends up getting those promotions when, if you're comparing between two people, at the end of the day, I mean, we're human beings, and I hate to say it, but like we do sometimes judge a book by its cover, and that could be something as simple as like, they say taller people make more money, for example, but also fitter people make more money. You present with more confidence, you have more confidence in yourself, and at the same time, then energy levels, all of that pours forward into either being more productive physically at work or seemingly appearing more productive. And again, both of those things from a human nature standpoint are rewarded oftentimes. So yeah, the idea of generating more income strictly by being healthier, it's kind of a win-win as far as I'm concerned, because you have more energy levels, you're feeling better, and that just translates to you being more productive in the end. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of ways we could break that down, but I am excited to unpack a lot of these things, and the idea of really viewing your health from a financial standpoint, not as something that you have to invest in because you're supposed to, but something that you should invest in for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your family, and really why that's so beneficial down the line. And I think ultimately, hopefully, we can get across the point that like it doesn't take nearly as much as you think, to both from a time, energy, and financial side of things, to really set yourself ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, even just the way that people you present yourself to people right now, it's like, if you go in there and you're unhealthy and you're overweight, probably not going to have that level of confidence that's going to, you kind of get back what you put out. So in that situation, if there's a lot of confidence oozing out of you, a lot of that's going to be reciprocated back in the way that people talk to you. And, even again, the way that, people, I hate to use the word judge you, but like, we all judge, and we're lying to ourselves if we don't. And so, I mean, we've seen this in, kind of our work, is just the people that you're around, even the nature of in the healthcare system, for instance, is if you have a doctor that walks in that's overweight, are people really going to take him as seriously as the guy who's fit, who's, clearly taking care of himself at the same time? And that goes across the spectrum of health. Is, those people that take care of themselves are just taken a lot more seriously. And I think we take ourselves more seriously as well when we put in the effort. And like you said, it doesn't take a lot to really move the needle. And that's something we've seen time and time again with, even clients that we've worked with of, just a few months of consistency, and they're in a completely different position, not just physically, but just the way that they view themselves because of what they see in the mirror every day when they get up. So, yeah, I guess anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think the productivity side would be another big piece. We touched on it a little bit, but at the end of the day, like if you feel better because you're taking care of yourself, because you're paying more attention to what you eat, you're exercising regularly, it's like that 30 minutes or 45 minutes of exercise leads you to being significantly more productive. You're going to get way more return than 45 minutes throughout the rest of the day, because mentally you're more focused, you're more present in your family and your relationships. But like even just specifically tying this to like the financial side of things, it's like I know that if I don't work out for a couple of days, my mind is wandering. I'm not nearly as dialed in with work as opposed to like you go and hit 30 minutes of cardio in the morning, you get all that blood flow to the brain, you're feeling good, and now yeah, you pour into work, and I'm just personally much more focused, and I think the vast majority of people would feel the same way, that you can get those 30 minutes back so easily when you get a little bit of activity, or again you're eating right, you're not just like crashing in the afternoon from an energy standpoint. So at the end of the day, yeah, I think the productivity side is underrated, and how that's going to translate, especially like if you run a business or something like that, that's directly tied to your inputs. It's like the return on that investment from 30 minutes of exercise for the day is vastly outperforming whatever little bit of productivity you lost by spending those 30 minutes on exercise rather than more work.
Yeah, and then you start thinking about it from the standpoint of like if you're trying to build something, I think back to like when we started with the social media side of things is like we first kind of focused on our health and making, probably a good year to a year and a half where, we were taking care of our nutrition. We were trying to get more walking in, lifting weights and just being consistent there. And we realized it unlocks kind of a new level of energy and focus that you didn't really know was there in the first place. So I think that's going to be really critical for anyone who's like frustrated with their current job and looking to build a side hustle, or even just like create another, 10-15% of income for them and their families. Is if you feel good, it's a whole hell of a lot easier to be able to pull that off than if you're just trying to like drag yourself to that side hustle, that Saturday project, whatever you're trying to do. If you don't have your health in a good position, first of all. So yeah, it's energy, but it clearly also carries over to like true costs. And I guess why don't we talk for a few minutes now about like kind of the real cost of being unhealthy and kind of the dollars and cents behind that, because I don't think most people realize that that is such a compounding factor in a negative way for themselves later on.
Yeah, we could start with the opposite of all the productivity would be obviously the loss of productivity. So with that, that could be something as simple as like you're sick more often. So therefore, maybe you're taking time off of work. You're physically unable to collect that paycheck for a few days, or maybe you're getting unpaid sick leave, or maybe you got to the family's sick, and now you got to like stay home, pull the kids out of school and things. So at the end of the day, it's like being able to invest in yourself again, more from like a time and energy standpoint, is going to play huge dividends. And that's on the productivity side, but you could also view it through like the true financial costs of call it doctor's visits, call it medications in a lot of cases, as things, whether it's more of an acute thing, but especially once things progress to more of like a chronic disease standpoint. I mean, that's when the cost of prescriptions just continue to pile in, and suddenly you could have three, four, five prescriptions, and they might be a few $100s each per month, and especially until you get that to that point of like maybe Medicare is going to cover some of those for you down the line, but there's, there could be a full decade between now and then where you're essentially paying out of pocket for a lot of those. And I know most people, or a lot of people these days, have more of like a high deductible plan because of how expensive any other plan is, and therefore, yeah, if you're basically paying cash for the first 5, 10 plus $1,000, you're essentially just running that up every year via prescriptions or doctor's visits, or especially if you get into more like the specialty visits and imaging and things like that, that just cost you an arm and a leg. I mean, thousands of dollars for some of those things that at the end of the day you just could avoid. Not all the time, but many cases they're avoidable when it comes to like these, type 2 diabetes and a lot of these things related to, more like body composition wise, that yeah, if you were kind of investing in yourself from an energy standpoint, sometimes from a financial standpoint, to avoid a lot of these things, it's going to have a huge ROI going forward.
Yeah, and even on like the insurance side of things too, of like if you're unhealthy, you probably need that plan that's going to cover everything for you. So you're having to probably put out, if you've got a family of any kind, it's going to cost you $2,000, $2,500 a month. and then you're still going to have the deductible to meet. Whereas, like, if you take care of yourself, there's health plans out there now, especially some of these health share groups. We're a big fan of Crowd Health, where, you can spend 400, $500 a month and you still have that catastrophic coverage. And you end up saving, 15, $20,000 every single year because, yeah, you need that coverage, but you don't need to be paying for everything because you're never going to use it anyways. So you kind of get that savings on the front side. And then, like you said, on the back end, if you're not having to kind of bleed yourself dry, you work so hard for your retirement savings. And again, I'd love to kind of get into how the system kind of bleeds us out, and how you could argue it's almost created that way of, like, you store up all of this stuff. And, let's say you store up $1 million and you go into retirement and you think, you and your wife are going to be set up for success. We're good to go, and we're going to pass XYZ amount down to our kids. There's a lot of situations where by the time they get and they finally pass, and there's just not a lot left anymore because they've kind of bled themselves out. I guess let's talk about kind of that nest egg conversation here for a few minutes.
Yeah, I've actually got a in-law family member who essentially works in that side of things, and she gives us examples all the time where these people, as you mentioned, they're in their 70s, 80s. They've got a lot of assets built up, but because it's all in their name, it ends up getting just slowly extracted. They go to a long-term care, it could be an assisted living, skilled nursing facility, and yeah, that's anywhere from like four to $10,000 a month. And for some people, they're going to be in that for the rest of their life. They're at a point where they're not able to take care of themselves. They don't necessarily have family members who are capable either. And yeah, you could be running up, call it $7,000, $8,000 every month. Indefinitely, and it doesn't take long for that to kind of bleed out. Even very wealthy people, it's you're going to eventually just run out of cash when it comes to that. And I mean, that could be your home essentially being eventually owned. And with things like Medicare, like, you won't qualify for Medicaid until you have less than a certain amount in your name. So, like, they'll literally bleed you to the point of there being nothing left. And it's ridiculous to think about that. That's how the system is set up right now. But yeah, it's the reality. So couple I'm not a financial planner by any means, but something to be said for trying to get some of those things out of your name if you are kind of in your 60s, 70s, putting it in, call it a trust, or just getting it out of your name, could be a family member's name, so that, yeah, if something does happen to you, they can't take your house instead. So that's a bit of a side tangent there, but I think it's at least worth mentioning given what we're talking about here. And yeah, just recognizing that, like, it doesn't take long for all of those costs to add up. And even if you've kind of spent your entire life building all of that wealth and you feel good with the number, we just have no idea what those healthcare costs are going to cost in, call it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And we've seen the impact of inflation in every other area. And healthcare has certainly not been spared by inflation. And arguably, I don't see any reason why it would slow down, given, there's kind of a lack of providers out there. There's going to be more and more people entering the healthcare system in the years to come. So I just don't see how those long-term care facilities aren't going to cost significantly more than they do now. And that just only exacerbates what we're dealing with.
And especially the good ones, that's really the difference. Is, you and I have probably been in, I have to guess, 50 different facilities in our time when we were working kind of in the field. And, like, there are some very bad places where I wouldn't want my dog to spend a night, much less have a family member or for myself end up there along one day. And so, like, yeah, like, even getting Medicaid ends up putting you in one of those bad facilities because of the fact that the reimbursement is so low. So that's just something to consider as well, is, like, if being healthy and being independent and putting yourself in a position where, yeah, you might end up needing some help for a short period of time, but you're not going to necessarily need to spend, 10, 15, even 20 years in some of these places. And that's not a crazy thought. That happens all the time where, people reach a level where, again, the system does a very good job of keeping you alive, but it doesn't do a very good job of creating, health and putting you in a position to be independent. So just kind of understanding that, like, yeah, if you get diabetes at 50 years old, what are your 60s and your 70s really going to look like? You might be here but what is the quality of that time going to look like, and what is the actual financial cost going to be, regardless of how successful you feel like you are right now. So yeah, I mean, we've had a number of those conversations with clients, with even family members. Just being kind of real with them, and they think they've got it all figured out, and you kind of hit them with that, and it's a very shocking thing to have to kind of start to crunch the numbers on.
Yeah, I mean, how many people do you know that arguably the only reason they might still be working if they're in their, call it late 50s or early 60s is more of like the health insurance side of things. There's so many people that are going to work strictly for the insurance because of how expensive it's gotten. And again, that kind of gets back into the crowd health side, or specifically more of like the health share planning, where like if you are able to at least have your health under control, I mean, it gives you the freedom there to save, again, thousands of dollars per month while still having some of that coverage that you're looking for in an emergency. So I think it's, yeah, again, kind of a good example of being able to maintain that independence, which I think is a big emphasis of what we try to hit on. Is you want to be able to make as many of those decisions on your own, and then not have it be left up to like, well, what is I can't retire because I need health insurance, because without it I'm going to spend $8,000 a month or $8,000 a year on all of this stuff. And just the more health you have, the more independence you have along the way to be able to make the decisions that are best for you, best for your family, and ultimately just, yeah, leading them where you're trying to go. So I guess, yeah, with that, we kind of transition toward, even talking about the idea of like retirement would be another aspect of things where there's a lot of people who can't retire, or are almost forced. They're actually forced into retirement because of their health failing, and like how that sets them back then in those future years. So, I mean, you might say like I could benefit from working for another 5 years, but like if you're doing like a physical job and your body doesn't allow it, again, you're just kind of tying your own hands there because of the health that you're in. So whether you're, I think about people in the trades who, you get joint pain and things like that that kind of force your way out, but it could be anything that, whatever you're doing now, if it involves some level of physicality, or arguably, even the mental side of things. I mean, we see how things like Alzheimer's and that is related to, kind of tied into like diabetes and blood sugar control and that kind of stuff. So it's like you kind of, whatever you're doing, your health is obviously important to it, and being physically and mentally at your best really just ties back to being at your best health. So they don't want to see anybody kind of forced into a bad financial situation, either forced retirement or unable to retire because of the health that they're in.
Yeah, and just a kind of a sidebar story that I remember probably about a year ago now, having a conversation with a guy who, he was being forced back into the workforce more due to kind of some family things that were going on. And he was in his 60s, thought he had it all figured out. And because of those family dynamics, he basically said, like, I'm unemployable right now. He's like, I was really good at my job. I was very successful, but because of my weight and where I'm at physically, being, 60 years old, there's nobody that's going to hire me. And he recognized, like, I've got to get after it. And he's down like 90 pounds now, I think, at this point, about a year later, and probably in the best shape he's been in literally 40 years. Is kind of what he recently said. And so it's like he recognized that, like, there's no way I could continue to work and for anybody to take me seriously, especially as a new hire, where I am right now. And I think, again, the nature of the economy, and there's a lot of things going on right now with all of that I think have created some level of uncertainty. It's like, if you're not sure about the security of your job and you're not sure what that's going to look like long term for you, I would still argue one of the best things you can do for yourself is just go get fixed. Like, go start taking care of yourself, because if the bottom falls out and you show up fully, physically and mentally capable, you're still going to be kind of moved to the front of the line. And there's always going to be a position for you when you're, physically capable to compete it, or to complete the job. So yeah, again, there's a million reasons to do it. And I guess that's why I'd like to transition here next into, we've kind of bashed a little bit on, the negative consequences of not taking care of yourself financially, kind of what the ROI actually looks like when you do invest in your health.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but just feeling better and looking better, being more confident, being able to just yeah, you walk into a room and like people will notice one way or another what kind of shape that you're in. And again, I think I touched on the idea of you kind of if you're in a leadership role, for example, it's like the way that you appear is going to make a big difference in whether people are kind of willing and ready to follow you. And I hate to say it like that, but it's just the truth. And also, I think there's a level of maybe it's unfair, but there's a level of kind of discipline that is presented there, or somebody who's fit and in good shape, you just assume that they are disciplined in other areas of their life as well. And it doesn't mean that it's true. In fact, it might be the complete opposite, or maybe they're pouring all their energy into one area and neglecting others. But that's just not the way that th're viewed. It's just the reality of the world that we live in. So yeah, I mean, the ROI on it is pretty clear, and we can kind of talk about something as simple as like that $250,000 number. Again, it's like if you're fit and you're making extra money over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, what that does for you from a financial standpoint. Now you put compound interest behind some of those numbers over the course of a lifetime, and like you're talking about a generational difference really between two people in a similar spot, but maybe just in different health standpoints, and kind of how that leads to a different path along the way. So I guess, yeah, kind of transitioning there. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about just the pillars, I guess, that people could invest in. And when I say invest, a lot of times that might not even be money. That might be more of like, hey, you need to stick some time into this, or you need to stick some energy into this. Maybe you need to learn about these things. So that's what I mean when I say invest in it. But let's start off with the nutrition side of things. I mean, what does that kind of look like to you, Chris, when you hear about like investing in your nutrition? Obviously, that could be as obvious as like the supermarket and what you're buying there. But yeah, why don't you break that down for us?
You guys know we're big on keeping things simple. Whole foods first, always. But when it comes to hitting your protein targets on a busy day, sometimes you need a little help. That's where Legion comes in. Grass fed whey protein that my kids think tastes like dessert. And I know exactly what's in it because they third party test all of their products for things like heavy metals. For busy families looking for convenient ways to hit their nutrition goals, it's a great tool to have in your back pocket. Use code B2B for a discount or the link in the description, and you'll receive cash back on all future purchases. Yeah, I mean, initially, I think it's just like wrapping your head around that it's okay to spend, an extra, let's just say, 200-300 bucks a month on groceries. I mean, when you think about some of the things that are available to us now, and the quality options that are available, if you're willing to spend that money, it's going to come back to you very quickly. And, it can be a simple trade off of like, okay, I'm spending an extra, 200 bucks a month, and that's, what is it, $2,400 a year. You're going to end up, over the long term, probably saving that in, you know, a couple months time if you're not having to take medications. Or, you even think about like the GLPs, and like, we'll get into that at some point here later on, but like, that's not cheap. Like if you're gonna have to be on that for, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, or indefinitely in many cases, like those things are hundreds and hundreds of dollars every single month. And with no off ramp in most cases, without the habits that are changing. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I would start with it, is just understanding that like, number one, you're gonna feel better. So, what does that do for you from a quality of life standpoint of like being available to, run around with your kids, and being able to, have the energy for your spouse and all that kind of stuff. And even just like be a pillar of your community, like whether it's your church or, coaching your kids' teams or whatever that might be. If you just feel like garbage because you're feeding yourself garbage, you're not going to do any of those things, or you're just going to be kind of functioning at a fraction of who you really could be. And so to me, that's, probably the most important piece of like just taking care of yourself from a nutritional standpoint opens the door to life, quite frankly, and not looking at it as like another budget item.
Yeah, and I would just echo the idea that I mean, I don't even think that you could spend $200 more per month in one way as far as nutrition, but like arguably, I would say a lot of people might even save money if they change the way that they eat, and that is not really factoring in the idea of like you go out to dinner. It's like how much does a dinner out cost these days? It's like if you just chose to do a little bit more home cooking, you're gonna save a ton of money along the way. I mean, cutting booze, cutting drinks, things like that. Obviously, like there's a million ways to like, spend less money, arguably, and still be investing in your nutrition, investing in your health. So it's yeah, I obviously like, if you're getting grass-fed beef, like that's gonna probably cost a little bit more than something junk off the shelf, for example. But like, yeah, clear ROI on how it's gonna make you feel, everything we've touched on to this point. But then there's other ways that you can get that money right back in your pocket. And yeah, cooking for an entire family for, 10 or 15 bucks for the meal as opposed to like going out and spending, 200 bucks on dinner. It's like even fast food these days is dramatically more expensive, I would say, than trying to, cook a pretty simple meal at home. So yeah, don't I think it's pretty misleading out there, in my opinion, the idea that like you have to spend so much more money at the grocery store. I mean, it's all expensive right now, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that it's dramatically more expensive to eat, pretty clean along the way, assuming that, you could talk about even some cheap options that are out there. I mean, potatoes, things like, even like beans and obviously, you get into like we talk a lot about like the grass-fed meat, and that sounds crazy expensive, but like if you're willing to like invest up front in it and get it from, a local farmer, for example, I mean, you could get beef from a local farmer for cheaper than you can get it from Costco these days. It's when you're getting it in bulk. So there's other ways to be able to do it. It just again takes a little bit more creativity and sometimes some time and energy initially upfront to kind of find those things. And then once you establish that system, it becomes a lot easier to just rinse and repeat with. You're not sticking any more energy into it. It just is what you do. And it's just as easy to go buy it from the farmer 2 times a year than it is to go and shop anywhere else.
Yeah, and we'll get into some more like, practically what does that look like in terms of, ways to invest here. Why don't we spend just a couple minutes talking a little bit about kind of the fitness side of things here, in terms of, just what does it really what does the investment actually have to look like? And I know you and I are both strong believers in, there's benefits to a gym, but I think having that home option is also just one of those things that's a very practical way to make a small investment and kind of take all the excuses out of it. But it's also just doesn't need to be that expensive. I mean, you and I see all the time these people that, they've got this whole room that's devoted to their home gym and, they probably got $10,000, $12,000 worth of equipment in there. That's just not needed. Even with what we do with most of the guys that we work with, it's like, if you got a set of adjustable dumbbells and a bench, you've got everything you need for, I'd say 95% of the population is going to be set there. And certainly like there can be some advantages of, having access to some machines if you've got some really arthritic joints and things like that. But it's not a necessity. And there's ways to make it work kind of regardless of the space you have available. If you've got honestly a space that's, call it, 6 by 6, you could probably knock out an entire full body workout in that space. So there's just not a lot of excuses or a lot of upfront costs needed to truly, take it seriously in terms of getting your fitness level in a much better position.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in a perfect world, yeah, I love the idea of a $20,000 home gym. That sounds great. I'd get a lot of use out of it. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, walking is free, push-ups are free. Being able to get out in the sun is free and do those things. So there's a balance to be had with it. And I mean, a gym membership is, 30 to 100 bucks depending on where you're going these days. So pretty low cost for the ROI with it. And yeah, I mean, I think there's different ways to do it. There's no one size fits all, but like at the end of the day, I think you need something. And if you feel like you're the person who needs to go to a gym to work out, great. You know, go sign up. It's not that expensive. And kind of the bigger investment that I think a lot of people struggle with when it comes to their fitness is really just the time aspect of it. And I think being able to recognize that like it doesn't take nearly as much time as most people think. I mean, most of the people we work with, they're doing, call it 2 hours of strength training per week. It might be, 2 to 3 sessions for 30 to 45 minutes. And obviously, like, you can do more than that if you like it, if you have time. Obviously, there's some return on going a little bit more than that. But again, like you said, for 95% of people who are just looking to kind of get, 80% of the benefit out of exercise, 80% is really coming within those, that 2 hours of strength training. So again, kind of majoring in the majors with your time investment there. I think knocking out 2 hours of strength training a week is going to put a lot of people in a good spot. And then from there you can kind of look at other areas, like I mentioned, walking and cardio, and there's other things that you can be doing. But yeah, if I only had 2 hours in a week, I'd probably stick those 2 hours into knocking out those three lifts, and again, kind of soaking up 80% of all of those benefits. So it's not nearly as much time and energy as a lot of people think, and clearly you get those 2 hours back based on everything we've touched on so far, as far as the return on that time investment.
Yeah, because ultimately there's it's never too late to get started when it comes to lifting weights or moving your body. And you could think about it as like, the muscle that you're building at 40 is what's protecting your joints at 60, 65, and 70. But even if you didn't start lifting weights to build muscle until you were 70, like that's still going to have protective capabilities, in the years ahead. And whether that's, you could say the same thing on like the cardiovascular side or the metabolic health side of like, if you're doing some things to be able to control your blood sugar, now it's going to prevent that diabetes in 10 years from now. And so that's kind of what, I really want people to understand is regardless of how long it's been, and if you've never invested, just no different than people talk about the compounding effect of, you should be investing at, 18 years old. And what's the difference between starting to invest, $20 a week at 18 or $20 a week at 35? If you don't start until you're 50 or 55 or even 60 years old, it's not too late. Like you can still see some amazing return on investment from that time and energy that you start putting into it. And you just don't want to continue to kick the can down the road because eventually, you're going to have to pay for it, and we're all going to pay for it one way or the other. It's just a matter of whether we're preparing ourselves for it to be able to handle, aging, because we're all going to get older. It's just a matter of what that cost is really going to look like as we continue to stack those decades.
Yeah, I mean, you said it's like all the most of the benefits of exercise come from going from, 0 to something, as opposed to going from, 8 hours a week up to 12 hours a week. You're not really seeing a whole lot of ROI there. But yeah, going from getting off the couch to moving is, where you get 50% of the benefits of exercise, basically. So always a fan of, wherever you are, you have to get started on something, and kind of letting that snowball into just feeling better, and being able to do a little bit more gradually. So yeah, I guess moving on from, the fitness side of things, kind of the next area could be that people could invest in would be something like, call it testing, or, the idea of you go to the doctor, you might get, some level of lab values there, but being able to, ultimately get down to a little bit more tangible numbers. And it could even be like DEXA scan. It could be getting like a fasting insulin number, which I know we've touched on in the last podcast. Just the idea of kind of getting to more like the nitty gritty on some of these numbers, and really allowing you to make some decisions from there. So I guess, Chris, are there anything that you think is really beneficial from like a testing standpoint that people should look into?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, and we touched on this a little bit with the last episode was, I think fasting insulin is a big deal. Being able to just understand that overall metabolic health, because everything flows from there. I'm a big believer in, being able to get the HDL level and that triglyceride level, because you can kind of look into it yourselves if you like, do a little research on this, but that triglyceride to HDL ratio, driving that number down as low as you possibly can. Ideally, below 2 is good. Anything below 1 is really elite. So those would be two kind of right off the top of the bat that are not necessarily talked about a whole lot, but I think have a lot of kind of data to be able to support from a metabolic health standpoint, just how important they are in terms of just disease prevention, really putting yourself in a position to be successful long term. And then, yeah, you kind of talked about the DEXA scan. I think there's also a lot to be said for functional testing too, of like, where are you at right now? And like, can you get, how many times can you get out of the chair without using your hands in a minute? Like, it's a simple test. But for some people, like, it's going to be eye opening when they realize, like, oh, I actually can do this one time right now without using my hands. But that becomes a baseline for you to be able to come back to as you continue to build. And, you touched on this a little bit earlier that, like, you're going to be able to, when you kind of set your mind to it, you're going to be able to make a ton of progress really, really quickly. And that's kind of the benefit of not being, maybe not taking care of yourself, right? For a bit is like, you're going to be able to see some like clear changes in your life and in your function just by dedicating, like Brett was saying, 2 or 3 times per week to strength training and walking and just doing those foundational things. Even another one I like is the Cooper test. For a lot of people, they probably just want to start off with like a walk or a walk with a little bit of jogging every once in a while, but you're just trying to see how much distance you can cover in 12 minutes. And again, easy thing to be able to recheck. Like, what does my cardiovascular ability look like? You can even convert that over to, there's some charts that basically show you like, hey, I walked, XYZ amount in 12 minutes. This is approximately where my VO2 max is right now. And so again, you'll see some massive progress in that area. And I don't know, is there any others that you can think of right now that from a functional standpoint that you really like?
Yeah, I think those are both really good, the ones you mentioned. It kinda just depends on, like, the modality available to you and maybe the type of shape that you're in, if you've got joint pain, those kinda things, but, there's you could do the same thing. You mentioned, like, the Cooper test as far as, like, run, walking. If your joints are a little bit more beat up, maybe you wanna use a bike, you could do something very similar, like, how far can you bike, over the course of X minutes, and, even another one I've been looking at lately, a little bit closer is like the 2,000-meter row for the rowing machine. Downside of that one is it is a little bit more skill specific. If you don't typically row, then it's not going to make as much sense to just like get on that machine and try it one time, because there's obviously some form and a learning curve involved there. But I do think it's a great one for people who have some level of joint pain because it's very joint friendly, as opposed to like trying to get out and run. We don't really tell people to go run if they don't do it already. To go out and do it for like a functional, fitness test isn't going to put you in a good spot. But as you mentioned, that's the nice thing about the Cooper test is it does allow you to walk throughout that, and still get a baseline number. But yeah, there's the bike ergometer that I touched on. There's the 2,000-meter row. That's great. And then even something as simple as like a balance test. Being able to like, can you stand on one foot? Can you stand on one foot with your eyes closed? Both of those things are correlated with anything from stroke risk to fall risk. And again, they're very simple, very easy to just test at any point. You could literally take 10 seconds and decide, like, am I able to stand on one foot and do this or not? So that's a nice thing about all of these is they're free. Like, you don't have to go out and get, you can if you want to, but you don't have to go out and get like a formal VO2 max assessment where they're hooking you up to the gas exchange and you're running on the treadmill to exhaustion. It's like those are options. They just you don't really have to do it to get a pretty good assessment of where you're at. And as you mentioned, best thing about these functional tests is like you can go out and retest them a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, and just figure out like, am I making progress? How much progress am I making? And which of these is really clearly a battle for me. So obviously kind of digging into those weaknesses and finding ways of like, okay, maybe you're strong, but like cardiovascularly, you're noticing that, you're way behind where you should be. You're getting out of breath, doing the walking test, for example. It's like, all right, this is an area that probably should be, have a little bit more time and energy stuck into. And that's where the biomarkers are nice too, that you touched on, because yeah, if we're talking about kind of tying this together from like a financial standpoint, it's like, you wouldn't try to run a business and not understand like the financials behind it. Whereas, same idea, you can think about these markers, these functional tests as really being like the financials of your body or of your health. And once you have a grasp on what those look like, you can actually start to make a plan to try to improve it. But if you don't know, if it's not measured, you don't really know what to improve, how to improve it, or really where you should be focusing your time and energy.
Yeah, I think, again, it kind of gives you that carrot to chase. I know that's important. Whether you're really oriented or not, it just at least allows you to understand where you are today, and then you can set some tangible or kind of some just basic things that are out in front of you, on a 3 month, 6 month, whatever that might be, or even if you're just rechecking it every month, just to be able to see what kind of progress you're making. Because whether your goals are just to get healthier, lose weight, I think it's important to have something else to be able to assess progress with besides just the scale, because the scale, we all know it does some funny things. And, if you're getting stronger and you're getting healthier, that's way more important than, if there's a 2 week plateau on the scale, because your body's kind of going through a bit of a transition. So, yeah, and that kind of ties into just like I think the mindset shift that just has to take place in this process of like, for a lot of people, they have a hard time, investing the time, and they view it as like, well, it's a bit selfish. It's taking away from my family, or I have a hard time just like pouring into myself with my time. And same thing, we talked about the cost of food, and realizing that like healthy food is really not that expensive if you have a strategy around it, and that you're setting yourself up for that retirement. Everybody's trying to plan out this like glorious retirement. But unfortunately, there's just so many people that they get to that retirement age, they get sick, a spouse gets sick. Like it's not, it's a very small percentage of people that get there and then truly get to enjoy it to the max of its potential because of health. And that's just the way it is, we tend to neglect it, and we neglect it long enough, and now all of this time and energy, that we've poured, you know, all of that into for this is kind of stripped away from us in a heartbeat. So, do you have anything else to kind of add here, Brett, before we put a bow on this episode?
Yeah, I think you hit it really well. Just the idea that it's cliche, but they say a healthy man wants 1,000 things, and a sick man wants just one. So it's just the idea that you know you can have all these goals and aspirations and financial goals. I think they can be important. We want to feel financially secure. We want to plan for retirement. But, yeah, as you mentioned, it's like if you're not taking care of yourself, like, it's what is it all for if you don't get to enjoy it, if you don't get to kinda see the process through with your family, and, taking care of your family is huge, but, like, arguably, the best thing you can do to take care of your family is to be taking care of yourself so you can be there for them, for many years to come, and not just be around, but physically be, at your best and capable of kind of responding to, whatever life might throw at us. So, yeah, it's just the idea of investing in yourself, and again, that's not always dollars. That might be time, energy, just that mental shift and refocus. That like it's okay to step away from work for a few minutes. It's okay to do what you need to do for yourself for 30 minutes a day, and those 30 minutes are going to show so much ROI for your family, your work, your financials, everything going forward. We just need to convince ourselves that that it's okay to do that once in a while.
Yeah, and I guess kind of one more little challenge here before we wrap it up is, yeah, I just encourage everyone to kind of do a quick calculation on, what are you spending on medications, doctor's visits, sick days, but also maybe even like meals out and alcohol, and some of those other things we talked about, because I think it all really does go together into, kind of that same pool that is, kind of taking away from our health, and just understand that like that math, we have an opportunity to kind of shake that up a little bit. And certainly with being able to find an opportunity for insurance that maybe isn't quite as expensive as what we have currently, because we're healthy, I think that becomes another big lever. So yeah, no, I appreciate everybody popping in, and just encourage that, if you enjoyed what you're listening to today, and you're kind of ready to break the mold and build a life that allows you to stand out, please subscribe and join the movement we've got going on here with Rejecting Average. So we'll see you guys next time. Let me ask you this: how much are you paying for health insurance every month? and how much of that is actually going towards keeping you healthy versus lining the insurance company's pockets while you pay high deductibles. That's why Brett and I switched to Crowd Health. It's not insurance. It's a community of healthy people who share each other's medical costs directly by cutting out the middlemen, bureaucracy, and the insane premiums that come with them. Between our two families, it's easily saving us over $2,000 a month. That's real money back in our pockets. And right now, if you use the link in the description, you'll pay only $44 a month for the first 3 months. That's $1,200 in extra savings just for getting started. If you're already taking your health seriously, why keep paying high premiums for others who aren't? The link is in the description. It's one of the easiest financial decisions you'll make.